Hello, and once again, welcome to today's event. My name is Magda Joshi. I'm the Events and Alumni Engagement Manager at UWCA Atlantic and a member of the Philanthropy, Partnerships and Engagement team. The title of today's Atlantic Circle in Conversation event is Island Life into Hemispheres, and we're delighted to be hosting Ella Breuil from the class of 2004, who will deliver a guest talk. Before we begin the event, I would like to kindly ask you to remain on mute throughout today's event unless you're asking a question. It would also be much appreciated if you could rename yourselves on Zoom to show your name and affiliation to the college so that we know if you're asking a question in the chat later on, how to introduce you. I will be using the chat function for the Q&A. So during Ella's talk, please post your questions there. The talk will last around 30 to 40 minutes, after which time we will have time for questions. The event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the UWC Atlantic YouTube channel. I'm now delighted to introduce Ella, who is a paramedic dividing her time between working with the London Ambulance Service and volunteering in humanitarian situations. Ella has a BSc in Marine Biology and an MSc in Applied Marine and Fisheries Ecology. She has experience of working for the British Antarctic Survey in South Georgia, an experience following which she returned to the UK and trained to become a paramedic. She is currently also the chief instructor for the NGO Atlantic Pacific, which trains crew for search and rescue, mostly in the Mediterranean, and which aims to build and distribute lifeboats in a box to reduce global drowning. I am now pleased to hand over to Ella. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. I probably don't need to talk about myself anymore after that excellent introduction. As Magda said, I left AC in 2004, and this is about a little bit about my life, both in South Georgia and volunteering in Lesvos. A little bit about me. When I arrived at AC, at Atlantic College in 2002, I knew exactly which community service I was going to do. I was going to be in the lifeboat service, and if not the lifeboat service, I was possibly going to be in the Coast Guards, but it was definitely going to be something to do with rescue and preferably something to do with boats. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do for my subjects, what I was going to do for my activities, no idea where I was going to eat, but I knew I was going to do something with boats. My RNLI, which is Royal National Lifeboat Institution, which is a national, the national lifeboat organization here in the UK. My papers to join that were on the desk on my 17th birthday, which is the earliest date you can join. I was very lucky and I was able to join the RNLI and join the crew. Not only that, I was quite lucky to pass the IB with an OK mark, which, considering the amount of time I spent not working and working on boats, was a surprise to both myself and some of my teachers, I think. After that, after I left AC, I was asked by the college to become a helm, to become a coxswain of the lifeboat, which I was able to do the next year at the slightly tender age of 18. I then spent the next 6 or 7 months, no, apologies, 6 or 7 summers coming back to the college, working for what was then called the Extramural Centre and covering call out for the lifeboat. I don't think it would be exaggerating to say that joining the RNLI, the lifeboats at college, was the life-defining event for me. If it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have done anything that I have done in my life, and it would be a very, very different place that I am now. For those of you who recognise it, that is the college's Atlantic 75 lifeboat, the Colin James Daniel, doing donuts in St. Donat's Bay, training in St. Donat's Bay in front of the castle. This is an incredibly rare photograph because it's an all-female crew. which is incredibly rare, not only in the RNLI, but also in search and rescue organizations all over the world. I'm currently a paramedic with the London Ambulance Service. I'll come on to that again a little bit later. The London Ambulance Service in ambulances in London. I still volunteer with the RNLI on the Thames, which is great fun. And as Magda said, I'm the chief instructor of the charity Atlantic Pacific, whose aim is to prevent global drowning. Currently, we're doing a lot of training and preparation to train search and rescue personnel in the migrant situation in the Mediterranean, which I will talk more about later. I've also worked for the British Antarctic Survey, which I'm going to talk about, and I volunteered in the Aegean. Let's start with my time in South Georgia. Once I'd left university, I'd done a master's in marine biology, and I'd always been fascinated by the Antarctic and by the golden age of exploration, which was mostly in the Antarctic. So I've always kept an eye on the job website of the British Antarctic Survey, or BAS, as I'll call it from now on. And when I saw a job I thought I could do, I jumped at it. And that job was boating officer for the government of South Georgia. South Georgia is a sub-Antarctic island. If you look at this map, you can see the round dot, and that's where it is. And it's pretty close to the Antarctic, as you can see. It's 8,000 miles away from the UK, and it takes 36 hours to fly to the Falklands via Ascension Island for fueling. And then you have to sail there. It takes 5 days to get to South Georgia by ship. There's no airstrip. You can do it in 3 days if you put your foot down, but most government organizations don't. So it takes 5 days to get there. Here we have a closer view of where it is. So this here, if you can see my mouse, hopefully, is the Falkland Islands. And this is South Georgia. The other islands surrounded by red are the South Sandwich Islands, which make up the rest of the UK Overseas Protectorate. It's always been important scientifically and important for the British. It had a British magistrate since 1909. The first scientific base was there in 1925, and BAS, the British Antarctic Survey, took over the base in 1969 and has continued to run the base there ever since, with one small-ish break between 1982 and 2000. Science continued during that time, but it was run by the military and not by BAS. You can see here these orange dots are, which I'm putting my mouse around, they are whaling stations. So the reason that there was any habitation there at all is because the waters around South Georgia are incredibly rich with life, mostly due to the krill, due to circumpolar currents. Sealing happened there extensively, and whaling as well. There were several whaling stations. Those are all whaling stations, as you can see, run by either Norwegians or Scots. There were so many whales that you used to be able to catch whales from the shore. Between 1904 and 1965, some 175,250 whales were processed at South Georgia alone. The largest blue whale ever recorded was processed in South Georgia. In 1912, she was 33.8 meters, which is 109 feet. This was really brought home to me when I was walking along the shore, and I found myself walking over what I thought was white bits of wood, but in fact it turned out to be bone that was just littering the shore and had become part of the beach. Now there are huge numbers recorded, well, comparatively huge numbers recorded. The latest survey happened in 2020, and especially blue whales are increasing, which is really fantastic news. The marine biologist in me is extremely excited about that. A bit more about the history. In 1982, South Georgia was invaded by the Argentinians. It was actually the start of the Falklands War. It was recaptured quite quickly by the British, but not before the scientists working for BAS had been taken prisoner. It's now, as I said, a British Overseas Territory, and it's run by the government of South Georgia, with 2 government officers on the island and BAS running the base for the government. little bit more about its most famous history. I'm pretty sure that most of you must know the story of the explorer Ernest Shackleton, whose ship, the Endurance, was crushed by ice. So he was trying to cross Antarctica with the Trans-Antarctic expedition. His ship was crushed here at the beginning of the Green Line. All his men got off and they pulled sleds and 3 lifeboats to Elephant Island. Elephant Island is not in the shipping lane, so it was very important they could get out. They were found. So Shackleton with 5 other men got in the 22.5-foot boat and sailed 15 days up to South Georgia, which was an incredible piece of navigation because they only managed to fix their position twice. Once there, only 3 of them were fit enough to be able to cross South Georgia. It was the first recorded crossing, and they reached Stromness whaling station. A couple of months later, the men were rescued from Elephant Island, and they all returned home, which was extraordinary, not to have lost a single man. They all returned home, had a little rest, and then unfortunately were sent off to the First World War. This is Shackleton's grave that was in the whaling graveyard right across the bay from the base, so I could see it every morning. He died there in a later expedition. A bit about Bass. It has 5 bases, King Edward Point and Bird Island on South Georgia. We couldn't visit Bird Island, it was too far away. Signy, Rothera, which is one of the main entrance points to the Antarctic, and Halley. South Georgia, really the only thing that happens there now is science and fishing. It's the most sustainable fishery in the world. There are 3 main fisheries. This very ugly chap on the left is holding a Patagonian toothfish. He's not ugly, I'm sure his mother loves him. He's holding a Patagonian toothfish, which is sold as Chilean sea bass and is incredibly lucrative. We have in the middle mackerel icefish, and then krill, which is the base of a lot of omega-3 oils. And it is the base of the food web, the ecosystem down there. Science, most of the science conducted by the government and by Bass is about the fisheries. So it's either directly the fisheries, so measuring the fish, measuring their otoliths, their ear bones, and seeing how healthy they are from there, or measuring the state of the ecosystem that they work on, live on, by observing the creatures that eat the krill, so higher predators of seals and penguins. Other science happens there, of course, meteorology, glaciology, soil science, everything, but that's the main science. This is the Pharos, which was the fisheries protection vessel, and we arrived on her after 5 days. King Edward Point, which is the base, is the only habitation now. There are no other stations. There were 8 of us then, the base commander, the doctor, 2 boating officers, including myself, 2 scientists, a fisheries scientist and a higher predator scientist, the mechanic and the electrician. This was my first view of King Edward Point when I arrived there. In the background is Grytviken, one of the old whaling stations. This green building, I don't know if you can see it, it's not particularly easy to see, is the boathouse, which was my domain. And then here were the offices and labs in the Cook Labs, and then Everson House where we lived. So my main job was to support the science. I might drop scientists off onto fishing vessels, or I might drop scientists off to their field sites because there was no other way of transporting around the island. It was just by boat. So I would drop them off, resupply them, pick them up, conduct search and rescue if I had to. Luckily, I didn't have to. I also had to support the government officers in their job, and that was mainly inspecting fisheries vessels. That mainly happened in winter. I was on the water several times a week. I was in charge of 4 boats, 2 jet harbour launches, Pipit and Prion, this is one of them, and 2 more traditional ribs, Alert and Luna. This is why the government officers and the base really were there, fishing vessels. These were here to be inspected, and this is a beautiful, calm day for boating, one of the classic South Georgia boating days. I don't have any photos of the also classic boating days of 2-meter swell, because I was usually holding on too hard to take any photos. This was easy to get anyone up onto the boats, onto the ships. It was slightly more difficult to get them onto their pilot ladders, which is basically a very small, thin rope ladder when the swell was 5 foot high, and trying to crush them in between my boat and theirs. Some days it was hard work, but most of the time, absolutely not sure at all. When I wasn't on the water, I was doing a lot of maintenance. This was a particularly horrible job of removing the old non-slip decking. Funnily enough, the previous boating officer had ordered this and ordered all the supplies and then left. And I understand why after doing that for a week. I also had to do a lot of engine maintenance. I always say that my learning curve was vertical. This is us. This is the mechanic and I changing an engine in one of the boats, which had a small sinking problem, which has made me wary of Jubilee clips ever since, but we're not going to talk any more about that. I also had to train all the other base members in how to boat and also in emergency procedures. This is the doc trying very hard not to burst my life jacket with a boat hook. I was very eager that everyone who came on the boat would be able to get me out of the water in a life jacket if I went overboard. Work was absolutely fantastic all of the time. Sometimes it was made more difficult by the environment. Sometimes it was made more difficult by the locals. I should explain that we were not allowed to go closer than 3 meters to any of the wildlife. They could come to us and touch us, but we could not go up to them and touch them, which made it quite difficult because this was the only access to my boat. And this weaning, we were called them weaners, elephant seal had decided that was the place where he wanted to have a snooze. So I had to do quite a lot of convoluted shushing to get him out of the way. It's also difficult if they are using the equipment that you want to use. But it generally was pretty easy to work around them. They were so sweet. One of the extraordinary things about South Georgia is that none of the wildlife has any fear of humans, as you can see. It was really extraordinary. They just had no idea that we were dangerous. So the maintenance and the boating were my core jobs. We also had to help the scientists. We also cooked once every 8 days. We cleaned, we did all the admin, we helped out with inventories, everything. And my favorite thing was working with the scientists. This is us setting up a remote camera site for Gentoo penguins. This was everyone's favorite job, which was weighing fur seal pups. In that bag is this, which is a quite rare fur seal pup. They are born with attitude. If you want to imagine a big male, imagine something between an Alsatian and a Rottweiler, but much, much angrier and able to catch up with you if you're a slow runner, or even if you're a fast runner. They really are born with attitude, but they are beautiful and fantastic to look at. They're normally black, but again, there's another blondie here. You can see they're completely unafraid of humans. More of the locals. This is a king penguin and chick. This is St. Andrews Bay. If you've ever seen any David Attenborough show showing penguins and or elephant seals, it was filmed on this beach, and we were able to go there once or twice. Every white dot that you can see is a penguin. This beach alone has 450,000 breeding pairs. That's close on 1 million birds. And this is a closer up view of another colony. The base, so as I said, sealing happened extensively and the seals were almost decimated. So when they built the base, they didn't realize that they built it in the middle of a fur seal colony. But as the seals came back, we realized, but we couldn't move the base by then. This is a big male and he knows that he's very beautiful. But as you can see, you can imagine how unpleasant it is to be chased by one of those. It was also an elephant seal colony. This is a young male who's not having any luck on the beach, so he decided, this is an early photo, he then moved onto the steps, which made it quite difficult for the doctor to get to her surgery, which building this is. This is a female elephant seal. These can weigh somewhere between 400 and 900 kilos. And he can weigh somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 kilos. We were incredibly lucky to be able to see the whole of the life cycle. This is a birth, and although it looks messy, it's actually a very successful birth. And we also had to study the seals as well, which was fantastic. An excuse to watch small fluffy animals all year or large fluffy animals was wonderful. When not working, we had a lot of fun. We could also go on holiday. As I said, we went to St. Andrews Bay. We had a very large personal two-person travel area. This was one of the luxurious accommodations that we were allowed to use. We were, mostly when we wandered around, we did a lot of photography. This is a sooty albatross, my favorite, which has a 2-meter wingspan, which is quite something when you come to see it to land. Or even you can see a pipit, which was the only songbird on the island and was very rare, but has since come back since the radio eradication project. After 14 months of, I wouldn't say work, fun on the island, even when I was working, my contract ended and I came home. This was the first sight of civilization, which was Stanley in the Falkland Islands. And I say civilization because, and anyone who has been to Stanley will understand why I'm saying that. I came home and I decided that I wanted to go on more expeditions to stunning places like that and do more science. I'd also always been interested in medicine, especially pre-hospital medicine. So I decided to combine the two and to become a medic and go and be an expedition medic. So I went back to university and became a paramedic, which took 2 years in those days. It now takes 3. And I thought I was going to start going on expeditions. Little did I know that my paramedicine was going to be directed more to the humanitarian world than the expedition world. I'm sure most of you have heard of the migrant situation in the Mediterranean. In 2015, migrants started to come to Europe from Africa and the Middle East in their thousands. This map is this year's numbers from the UN, and I just want to remind you that that's March, so it's quite a few. I'll let the numbers speak for themselves, but you have to remember that the dead and missing are only those who have been confirmed dead or confirmed reported missing. We know that there are probably thousands more missing. After I'd finished my paramedic course, I had a summer before joining the London Ambulance Service, and I wanted to help. Luckily, I had been asked by a friend who was the coordinator of a new charity to come out and helm their ex-RNLI lifeboat in Lesvos, the red circle. It's in the Aegean and very, very close to Turkey. So I arrived and went up to Skala, which is a tiny village on the north of Lesvos. As you can see, it's only 12 kilometers from Turkey. So it's very, very small, very, very close. And it's therefore the closest bit of Europe to those waiting in camps in Turkey. It's one of the most picturesque places I have ever seen. Blinding white houses, bright sunshine, incredibly friendly locals, and bright, bright blue water. But by the time I'd arrived in 2016, dozens, if not hundreds, were dead under that bright blue water. The locals had been nominated in 2017 for the Nobel Peace Prize for the work they did, the rescue work they did before the international NGOs started to turn up. I was there volunteering with a charity called Refugee Rescue. They'd been given the funding for an ex-RNLI Atlantic 75, which had been the lifeboat at AC. So I was in my element after boating in ice and storms in the sub-Antarctic with heavy dry suits and all that gear. I thought, great, helming a lifeboat in the summer in the Aegean in board shorts and a t-shirt. It was a dream. What could be better? I couldn't have been more wrong. The migrant boats leave Turkey at about midnight and they arrive on the coast of Lesvos around dawn so they can see where they're landing. We, in the early days, would then therefore patrol from about 4 to 8 every morning. We weren't allowed to do that in the later years by the Greek authorities. We mainly wanted them to stay away from the dangerous areas of the coast, including the lighthouse, which is round the corner of this picture. Terrible shipwrecks had happened at that lighthouse, with already dozens, if not maybe hundreds, dead, with mostly the locals looking on after they had filled their tiny fishing boats with as many people that they could grab out the water as possible, and then they couldn't take any more. As well as being on the water for 4 hours a day, every day, we were often called either during the night or the day by the spotters who'd seen the boats coming from Turkey and called us to go and help them. We ran for weeks on very little sleep, but it didn't matter because what we wanted was a site like this, which was a safe landing. So that boat is about 4 meters, and I seem to remember that it had about 40 people on board. So that's just telling you how rammed they were. The boats they were given were disgraceful. Some were rowboat boats bought on the black market. Others were made from fiberglass, and others still were made from fiberglass, but from a mold from another boat. But it was made so thin that you could see through it. Here you can see the cracks that had been created before it even got on the water and had been fixed with parcel tape. And I don't know if any of you are boat builders, but parcel tape is not the material to use. It costs about $1,000 per person to cross. This number goes up if you have a fiberglass boat. It almost doubles if you are dropped off by the smugglers in their fast boat. And terrifyingly, the number goes down if you cross in bad weather. They could buy life jackets, and hundreds did. This is the life jacket graveyard, which is quite famous now, where they were all dumped. We, however, tested the life jackets, and actually they took in water and they made you sink quicker than if you hadn't been wearing anything at all. It was absolutely disgusting. These smugglers were not only taking their money, but also were cold-heartedly taking money and selling them something that they knew was going to make the situation worse. Most of these people can't swim. Over the years, I've been there several times in both summer and winter. There's always a lot of waiting around. You can't leave the tiny port in case we had to launch quickly. I got through a lot of books and a lot of Greek coffee. Over the years, things have got more organized. This is a transit camp built above the port by the authorities where they could stay. So it was both friendly and unfriendly. They could stay in some comfort and shelter, but also they could be contained so they couldn't leave. As you can see, the wires is quite high. So they would wait there to be bussed to Moria, which is the main camp an hour south next to the capital of Mytilene. The political situation in Greece has changed very much for the worse since I first was there. They are very much more authoritarian and they are conducting what, quite frankly, illegal and dangerous activities. The law says that if someone enters Greek or European waters, they have to be allowed to land and claim asylum. I witnessed the Greek authorities pushing them back across the border, and it has been confirmed that now they are taking people who have arrived on the beach, putting them in life rafts, dragging the life rafts across the border and leaving them to drift, which is completely illegal and very dangerous. Moria was built in 2015 to house about 3,000 people, but after things changed and they weren't allowed to move to the mainland, this became horrendously overcrowded. At its height, it held 22,000 people, women, children, the sick, the hungry, and the angry. I am very conflicted when I talk about the political situation in Greece because they are conducting illegal and dangerous activities, but they've also been abandoned by the EU, completely abandoned. Italy, Malta, Greece, Spain have been left to deal with this ever increasing mass of humanity that only wants to be able to work and to be able to have a safe place to live. But they are being denied this because the Europeans are just leaving them in Greece, not allowing them to move on. And it's frustrating and frankly embarrassing to call oneself a European when you think of that. The conditions in Moria are horrendous. There's open defecation because people are scared to go down to the latrines. Not enough running water, if any, sometimes. Electricity is stolen from the main electricity lines by then climbing up, stripping the wire and wrapping wire to run into tents. It is unsurprising that it burnt down last year, and they are now housed in possibly even worse conditions in a place called Karatepe, quite close to where it was. Anyway, back to here, which was a much nicer camp. It was where the migrants, when they arrived, could get some food, some dry food, hot tea or water, and then we could exchange, or the charity Lighthouse Relief could exchange them their clothes, their wet clothes, for dry clothes, and the Lighthouse Relief generally looked after them a bit there. We worked very closely with Lighthouse Relief. They did this. They also had spotters in the hills above the port, when they would see when the migrants arrived across the border, and they would tell us and all the authorities to guide them to safety. They also had landing teams which would arrive at the landing sites if it could be achieved by land, check them over for medical cases, and bring them to the transit camp. Our job, once we found a boat, once we were directed to a boat, was to calm them down, check for any medical cases, and guide them or show them where a safe landing spot was. This was tricky since we had to point rather than get them to follow us, because getting them to follow us ran the risk of the authorities saying that we were smugglers. I know, I didn't understand it, but we obeyed the rules so that we couldn't be stopped. We couldn't go, it was obviously much more difficult at night, we couldn't go too close to the boat in case they steered towards us and punctured themselves on our boat, or in case they all came to one side and they tipped the boat. In the first years when I was there, the migrants spoke mainly Arabic and French, because they were mainly from Syria and sub-Saharan Africa. They now speak mainly Farsi, and they're mostly Afghanis. I don't know about you, but my Farsi is rubbish. Luckily, a smile and a wave is universal in any language, so that you can generally make yourself understood as long as you're smiling, and that's what we did. My role as helm was either to get us within a safe distance of the boat, or to get Mokara, which was the name of the lifeboat, into the shore as safely as possible, which was quite difficult because the shores are quite dangerous. When we had another helm, which we quite often did, I was medic. In fact, for some of my last time there, I volunteered with Medical Volunteers International, who were a team that went with the landing teams, and I went with them by road. Very odd. I prefer to be landed and then picked up, none of this walking business. But we would arrive at the landing sites and help with any medical issues. Being a medic with a very, very bare minimum on a beach, in the dark, in the cold, surrounded by people who don't speak any language that you speak, is with no backup, is incredibly different to being a medic in London, and it can be quite interesting. I had to deal with various injuries, injuries from the crossing, some partially healed gunshot wounds I had, torture wounds, epileptic fits, psychological traumas, and a lot of pregnant women, including, very sadly, a couple of active miscarriages with every group of pregnant women that we had. Numbers crossing fluctuated. In 2015 and 16, there were thousands. Then the EU made its deal with Turkey about Syrian refugees, and the numbers slowed, but there was always a steady trickle. In the summer of 2019, the dam broke again because Erdogan wanted to show Europe that he was containing the migrants and opened the borders, basically, and we were inundated. This is the day that 570 people arrived on one beach in 10 boats in 45 minutes. This was before there was a medical NGO on site, and in fact it precipitated it. once we had guided the boats to land safely, which was luckily very close to the village, I landed with our medical kit and all the water we had. The landing teams also had easy access, and the doctor who was volunteering with Lighthouse Relief, she'd finished medical school the month before. So she and I triaged 570 people. We were incredibly lucky that there was no real injuries and no real illnesses. Once we had triaged, we were there for 6 hours, checking them, giving them water, and as the sun dropped, we gave them foil blankets to keep warm. Once we dealt with the medical cases, we wandered through the masses on the beach and talked to them, tried to keep calm, tried to answer their questions. It was difficult because often you would be asked, how many hours will I stay in camps? And it was very difficult because we knew that they would be staying there for up to 2 years. We also played with the children. Most children had never been on the sea, had rarely seen the sea before, but children are children everywhere. And within about half an hour, they'd stripped off their shoes and they were running in and out. And I spent a good 2 hours running in and out of the water with them. And, you know, humanity is humanity wherever they are and whoever they are. They were then in a transit camp for up to 72 hours, being bussed down to the south of the island and processed there. That is the end of my talk. I've been incredibly privileged to work both in absolutely stunning South Georgia and with the incredible people of the NGO world, helping those to cross that bit of water. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without Atlantic College and without the opportunities I had to join the lifeboat service there. I hope that you found some of this interesting and you enjoyed yourself, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ella, for this fascinating and eye-opening talk. Before we turn to anyone who might have questions, which we welcome for you to post in the chat, I think that the theme that I picked up from your talk is that of resilience, and I would love to hear more about where you, as an individual, take that resilience from, what inspires you to keep this hard work, and you know, what's behind this all this very, you know, sometimes heartbreaking and very challenging type of activities and life. Is there anything that in particular that drives you, or that you've learned that you rely on?
I think it's very easy to see people as another language speaker, another nationality, another color. But the thing that drives me is that people are people. And that's something I learned, I think for the first time, probably fully learned it at Atlantic College. You know, figuring out that we're all people, we all eat, we all sleep. And in terms of resilience, I think people are people and should be allowed to live, no matter where they come from or how they get there. I find the political situation very, very disheartening and depressing. So I concentrate on the fact that I believe that no one should drown at sea, and that's it.
That's really yes, important and thoughtful. Thank you. Lawrence has commented also along similar lines, asking if you were ever, or you are ever scared.
Scared? I'm assuming you mean when I'm out there boating. Yes, I'm scared sometimes. I have been in situations where the people on the beach aren't sure whether I'm there to help or not. they're scared of being sent back, and that's quite scary sometimes. I've had the deck gun of a Turkish Coast Guard vessel pointed directly at the boat, which was I drove pretty quickly away from that. Let's just say that. Mostly, I just like to pretend I'm a swan. I just like to pretend I'm going like that, and underneath I paddle very frantically. But yes, I'm scared. But then I can be scared in my normal day job of being a paramedic on the streets of London. The key is to get that fear and make it work for you. Just heighten your emotions, heighten your brain, make it work quicker, and keep your eyes on a swivel. And that's generally what I find the fear does to me.
You will probably have a look at this later, but I just wanted to highlight that a number of people have said in the chat how amazing you are and how amazing the work you've been doing is.
No,
and
the teams that I've worked with are the amazing people. I'm just very lucky to be able to give my skills to help them, to help the teams, help people.
We have a question about more on the political angle from Sheila from the class of 70. Sheila, would you like to ask your question directly? You would need to unmute yourself in case you might be speaking.
Okay. Can you hear?
Yes.
What I was going to ask is, you're saying about the migrants, of course, it will never stop because of the world situation. How do you see Northern Europe being forced, if you like, to change its policies, or do you think they will continue to pretend it's not happening?
Well, from what I see, Northern Europe deals with things very much in terms of fear. If they look at the numbers, they will see that the number of refugees in the world the numbers of refugees in Lebanon alone is almost the number of refugees in the entirety of Europe. Frankly, Northern Europe has to get its finger out its arse and figure out whether it wants to be an area that helps humanity or hinders it. And that is going to be very much reliant on who is in power. And with our populist governments at the moment, I fear it's going to be a while.
That must be very frustrating. Just you're dealing with the day-to-day, week to week.
It's pretty frustrating, yeah. But we just do what we can at the lower levels.
Thank you. We also have a question from Victoria Provis. Victoria, would you like to ask your question directly?
Ella, lovely to see you. That was absolutely inspiring. Just wondering, do you still dream of going back more into a sort of exploration type role? Or are you now, for want of a better word, resigned to remaining as a paramedic and on the RNLI here in Chiswick, which we love thinking that you were around? But do you still want to go back to the Antarctic or more?
Every so often, I dream of South Georgia still. I hear the sounds of the beaches in my dreams sometimes. And yes, I'm hoping that one day I can figure out a way to combine both. Maybe 6 months down south doing something expeditionary and several months in the Mediterranean. I haven't quite figured out the balance yet, but I'm sure I'll get there.
And is there somewhere else you would like to go? Another?
Or the Arctic.
Further field? The
I'm
Arctic.
not very good with heat.
Thank you very much. Amanda is asking, well, firstly, she's complimenting you on a fabulous talk and asking, other than your lifeboat skills, what else did the college AC give you?
Well, for one, it showed me that people were people, which is incredibly important. Stupidly, it taught me how to live with people. You'd be surprised how difficult it is for some people who have always lived with either their nuclear family or by themselves to live with a group of people for 14 months. And AC very much taught me how to get along with people if I could, and if I couldn't, the coping strategies of someone having to work in class or on a boat with them, and yet just being able to not deal with whatever issues they have.
That's inspiring.
Also how to deal with bad food, although the food has changed dramatically since then.
Always important too, I agree. Rick Staniforth has posted a question in the chat. Rick, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Magda. Well, Ella, what a life you've had. And it's clear you are one of life's givers. You're one of these people who go out and help so many others in need. What's your challenge to us lot? We're sitting here watching you. You must need our support in some way. What would be the best thing for us to do to support your focus?
Well, there's the simple things of helping in the local migrant reception center, giving blankets, that sort of thing. But the most important thing is to vote and to pester our MPs, to pester for change. We need to have, we can't fix it. This is one of the few things that we cannot fix from the bottom. We have to fix it from the top. And UWC alumni are often influential, often very good at talking and networking. And I truly believe that if we all really wanted to, we could effect some real change just by annoying the hell out of our politicians.
Thank you.
Thank you. On a related note, Alberto Gonzalez has posted a question which is to do with alumni involvement. Alberto, would you like to ask your question directly?
Yes, of course.
If not, then I will just read it out. It's aimed at both myself and...
Yes, here's me. Yes. I guess you're not reading the question.
Please, Alberto.
I'll read it out. Actually, it's my wife's question, my wife's idea, but I share it. Thank you, Ella, for a most inspiring talk. I love your talk. Question to Ella and Max, to both of you. We would like to know if there is any initiative run by AC Atlantic alumni to support the NGOs working with the migrants.
Well, I am part of Atlantic Pacific, which was started by one of our alumni, Robin Jenkins. It's developed from a project he had dealing with the tsunami in Japan, and we now hope to prevent global drowning by building lifeboats in a box and depositing them and developing lifeboat stations where there aren't any. But currently, at the moment, we're training people in search and rescue techniques. I don't know if there's any alumni political organization. I think there should be one. I'm not brave enough to start one, but I think there should be one. So maybe you would like to take the lead.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ella, turning towards your work for BAS, which you talked about in the first half of the presentation, and which I've seen Eva, an alumna from class of 87, complimented you on the photography that you've showed us all through the presentation. Emily Nichols from class of 2016 has a question. If you could simply talk about your work at BAS, and then Emily, please correct me if you had a different question also, or was it just a general inquiry about that?
My question is, I'm actually currently in the process of applying to the British Antarctic Survey because I just finished a degree in June from a university in Arctic Norway. So like polar research is definitely my calling. And I was just wondering if you have any tips for people like myself who are fresh graduates but who just have like bachelors. Like, is there any hope to be employed by BAS at this level in my career, or do you think I would need to specialize a bit more first?
Well, without sounding facetious and without putting down any degree or anything, a bachelor's degree is quite difficult to get in on the scientific level, but the scientists are actually the very least number of people there. It takes a lot of technicians and a lot of people to keep the science going. So there are positions such as marine assistants, general assistants, field assistants. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. Some of the jobs are Antarctic bin men, but you're a bin man in the Antarctic, or a bin person in the Antarctic, and it's never that one job. You'll gain experience. So get your foot in the door, however you can. Apply for jobs that you know you can do. Apply for jobs that you think you might be able to do if you do a lot of reading between the application and the interview. I really didn't think I was going to get this job, but somehow I did, and I even fluffed a question at the interview, but it doesn't matter. If they see that you are enthusiastic and that you are willing to work hard, then they will consider you. But get your foot in the door doing anything.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure that other alumni watching this will also find it helpful, those who graduated most recently. I received a question directly also asking about suggestions for any books or journals which you would recommend for people interested in working in your field or just becoming acquainted with that.
In which field? An Antarctic field or in the political field? In the Antarctic field. South by Shackleton. This Thing of Darkness is an incredibly good novel. I can't remember who it's by, about the relationship between Darwin and Fitzroy traveling around those areas. The account of the journey by Frank Worsley. All of those are fascinating. I could reel off. If I was near my bookcase, I could turn around and read them all off to you, but there are hundreds, but South by Shackleton is a very good place to start.
Thank you very much. These are all very useful recommendations. And maybe to close or to look towards the future, do you have any words of recommendation or wisdom for anyone who might be interested in following your career or in kind of widening their perspectives?
I think it would be, in both the scientific world and the NGO world, it would be what I said to Emily. I hope I pronounced that right. Get your foot in the door, and it doesn't matter if you don't think you can do something, you probably can. So in terms of expeditioning, just do anything that you think you can do, or apply for jobs that you don't think you can do. And in terms of the humanitarian world, literally anything you can do to help these people, is good. There are NGOs by the dozens working in Greece, and while there are the big ones like MSF and UNHCR and all of that, there are also tiny little NGOs that are started with 3 people and a piece of paper. And in the humanitarian, in the European migrant humanitarian world, it's not the big behemoths of MSF and UNHCR that are helping. It's the tiny ones, and it's the tiny people, and anything you can do will help. And just volunteer to do anything, really, in terms of both scientific work and NGO work. Email people, call them up, and just go for it. Don't be held back by what you think you should do, or what, oh, I don't know enough yet, or I haven't got enough experience. Doesn't matter. You'll get the experience. Just go for it. Just go and help.
Thank you very much, Ella. Quoting from a number of comments on the chat, I'll just say thank you for this most inspiring talk and for widening our horizons. It was great to hear you speak. Thank you. To close today's session, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We would be very grateful if you could take a couple minutes to let us know what you thought about today's event, and if you have suggestions for further events of the Atlantic Circle in Conversation series. My colleague Keith has just posted the link to our online survey, so we would be very grateful if you could complete this. We also hope that you will join us at future events of the series. The next online event we'll be holding is actually an Unraveling UWC Atlantic series, which will be focused more on the college activities, and that will be held on Thursday, the 25th of March, and we will be, of course, promoting it further closer to the time. So we hope to see you then, and thank you very much once again, and thank you to Ella for this fascinating talk.
Well, thank you very much for having me.